morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source. We're all on mute. Sorry.
I know.
There we go.
Usually
The automatic comes off. So that was
Usually it does, yes. But hey, we're live. So live things happen on the show. Welcome. Very nice to see you too.
It's good to see you. Jonathan,
Yes.
thank you for joining today. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hope we can have a fun conversation today. I know that we have a specific topic we want to talk about, but I think there's other things I would like to get into with you as well. So
Sure.
what are we talking about today, Rose?
Well, we are going to be talking about what we call CIQ Bridge. And it is named very appropriately because some people are perhaps haven't made a decision on what operating system they want to move to because they've just been hanging out on CentOS for the last 20 something years.
14 years on this version.
On this particular version, yes. And even though it's time to migrate, sometimes that can be a bit challenging for reasons. So CIQ has created a bridge to really give people a little bit of time if they have not made that decision yet. So we are going to be talking about that. But Jonathan, this is your first time here with us on the webinar, and we're live. And I know that can be sometimes kind of weird, but you know what? We're just hanging out in my living room, man. We're just friends. We're chilling. We're talking. We're having good conversations. So do you want to maybe introduce yourself and tell the good people out there what you do at CIQ?
Sure. My name's on my window. I go by Maple because I'm from the Midwest and there's a lot of Jonathans here or Johns. So at any rate, I'm a senior software engineer specifically dedicated to the Linux kernel. I come here from Amazon Linux, where I did not work in the kernel, but I worked in some user space stuff, and specifically now that the FTC has done away with NDAs, I'm sure that I can discuss a little bit more, but I don't want to get into the too deep, dark pits of internal knowledge at AWS. But I was working on helping internal service teams migrate from one of our versions of Amazon Linux to Amazon Linux 2, while at the same time trying to help support them with Amazon Linux 2023. And then prior to that, I had a small stint at another company where I was doing like run ops, DevOps engineering. It was not really my forte, what I wanted to do. And then prior to that, I worked at Cray Supercomputing as a Linux kernel engineer. I was also the GPU technical lead. So I dealt with the kernel and backporting. We were SUSE based at Cray, and I also worked with NVIDIA and our customers that ran NVIDIA based GPUs. My two main big machines there, if people are familiar with the industry, was the Titan supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Labs and PISDANT Plus at CSCS in Switzerland.
Very cool. Yeah, you've seen some stuff.
I've seen things.
I was going to say, you have not been bored.
No. So we had an interesting conversation yesterday, Jonathan. I think part of what I would like for you to do is just give us a high level of what is Bridge, first of all, if you don't mind.
Sure. It is not more LTS. I think that's the important thing to distinguish. There are other companies out there that are selling a more like a extra 5 years of, LTS support, where we are offering you need to make a decision. We can try to help bridge you to one of our offerings, be it Rocky 8 or Rocky 9. However, this isn't something that's encouraged to stay on forever because as it ages even more, it gets more and more difficult to keep our customers safe and secure as best we can. So I don't know how much of the details we're allowed to talk about, but the price goes up.
Yes, it does.
The line goes up.
Because it gets more complicated. And I think
more
that's part of what
complicated, it gets more difficult. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's part of what we should talk about. But I remember yesterday after we were talking, I did go look, and this CentOS 7 came out, this version, on June 30th of 2013. So if you're still running that thing, it's time to move. It's time to move on. We've had a lot of people ask us to go do this, and that's why we're doing it. But the idea is to get you to something more modern. I think that was part of what we talked about yesterday, Jonathan. I want to get into it with everyone is why it's a good idea to stay more current. So we'll get into that. But in your words, because I have several stories that I've heard customers tell me, but why do you think people are still stuck running this old version of CentOS 7?
I think there's a lot of reasons. Some of it is upgrading and migrating your application stack between the various versions of a distro release, if depending on if you use containers or don't use containers or whatnot, is challenging, especially when like core like system D or core systems like glibc requires full updates of a lot of like linked software that you would use changes. So you have to spend the time to update your application, and updating your systems doesn't turn profit, but it prevents you from having outages. It prevents you from being vulnerable. It enables you to potentially leverage new things. And that's hard to quantify if you don't have a team that is like, their whole job is to stay on top of it and stay out in front of it. And for sufficiently large companies with sufficiently complex software stacks, keeping stuff maintained exactly the same is a benefit because it allows them to focus on those other things. But the longer you stay on that, the harder and harder it becomes to migrate.
Absolutely, it does. It becomes painful. I think one of the questions that I get asked quite a bit is, why is it so hard to keep something like that going for so long? And I mean, not just CentOS 7, but in general, as an operating system gets older, especially in Linux, what makes it so hard?
So because the holy grail of open source software and whatnot is that the code is visible and maintainable by the community, and we're leveraging that to build additional private, or excuse me, we as the community, the royal we, are building software on top of that. If we're building our own custom private, whatever it is that you're doing at your company, if you're trying to add your differentiation there, you want to stay you don't want to have to think about these other things. I have gone off topic. Hold on, let me bring it back. Nope, I've lost the topic. What was the thread?
All good. No, so just the why is it hard to do? To keep things like this alive for any length of time?
You actually posted a picture yesterday that I thought was, I mean, I'm a picture person, obviously, right? Like code is nice, right? Letters and words and dashes, like that's cool. But an image really says it all. And there was like this little penguin that was just on top of it. Just I wasn't sure if it was alive or not, or like maybe it was just like basking in the sun, but it looked very tired. I was laying on this rock, and I asked him, I'm like, I hope he's okay. Is everything all right? And he was like, well, this is what happens, Rose, when you have, what did you say, 800 CVEs in 2 months?
Yeah. So that's its own unique situation where the Linux kernel became its own central authority to cut CVEs. That is a discussion we can probably have for another webinar that can have some other experts in the field on to really discuss why vendor kernels, and this also, I guess, leads into your discussion as to why vendor kernels and locking on to like, CentOS 7 and all the user space stuff is all the same. That was 11 years ago. What software were you running 11 years ago? What version of your iPhone or your Android were you running 11 years ago? What version of Facebook or Instagram was out? Do you want to go back to those versions?
No.
Imagine how much code has changed in those 11 years in the open source community. So that requires a company like ourselves, like Red Hat, like SUSE, like Oracle, or Debian or Ubuntu, to be able to go and say, all right, this is this fixed in time, package. We're going to keep pulling stuff back from the upstream, but it's still mostly fixed in time. And they have, in the past 11 years, accelerated that code base into something that may not even be reflective. So your code may have been modified and whatnot, but it's still technically vulnerable. But you can't just go grab a piece of code that was committed upstream and bring it back and make it work. Just, oh, yep, this code fixes this bug and we have this line, but it's just not going to go yoink right in there. You might need to have custom engineering, like your teams working on the kernel, working on user space software, etc., manipulate it in. And then you're still not matched up with what's upstream. So you have published code that is not being maintained by the upstream, only maintained by that vendor. And so the deltas get real large, and then only that vendor is watching that specific version most of the time. Or security researchers then contact those people like, hey, you got a big old bug here. Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of that recently. So
nice.
So yeah, that's why it's challenging to do that, is the code drift. And again, think 11 years ago. Heck, think 5 years ago, what versions of software we were using.
So I imagine that unless you are kind of working at the OS or kernel level, you probably don't have a need. It's kind of like someone explained it to me, like the plumbing of your house, right? Like it's underneath the floor, it's in the walls. Like you don't really ever see it. No one really thinks about it until there's a problem, right?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it's like everything stops and you're going to get that fixed and it becomes a priority. So what we're doing here, talking about CIQ offering a bridge, we're looking at a potential sewage backup to stay with the analogy, but we've been kind of warned that it's coming, right? Like usually it just happens when it happens with your house. This is basically, and why I keep coming back to like, what even are we talking about, is because you'd be surprised how many people really just don't understand what's happening with CentOS, why we are in this situation, and what it means to have an end of life of an operating system that has been open source and freely available for the last 20 something years. So do you want to maybe kind of touch on what your understanding of that is, like, to help educate people who are actually the ones who are making decisions? Because usually people who are working at your level aren't necessarily the ones who are making decisions about, purchasing something like CIQ Bridge.
Yeah. I think first off, your analogy about, the kernel and kind of the low level stuff being like equivalent to your plumbing and stuff. There's a conference called the Linux Plumbers. Like, it's called Linux Plumbers, and it's all about like how the internal kernel stuff works and whatnot. Yeah, so there was a lot going on there, and I get distracted easily. I'm sorry. So what is it? The question is, what is it that you think that people are missing as to why they're not addressing it early?
Yeah. I mean, like, how would you tell someone who's actually a decision maker on purchasing something like CIQ Bridge from CIQ? Like, what would you tell them is like, why is this necessary, right? Like, from someone who you're working on the kernel operating system level and you're looking up going, hey guys, this is an issue. Like, you need to make some choices now.
The big thing I would say is that Red Hat has done an amazing job at trying to support CentOS as it can. But when IBM says that it's too much work to maintain, I think you should maybe take that a little bit to heart. Why would you choose CIQ's version over like the other vendors that are also offering long-term support. I think it is that we, and I don't know all the contract details. I am not in those discussions. I would imagine a part of our policy is we are going to help you with, like, I believe we have a sender that helps you bring stuff out of CentOS 7 to or Rocky 8, or I don't know if a 7 to 9 exists, but that would also be a really valid jump if you don't want to have to also upgrade Rocky 8 in the near term to Rocky 9. So we're trying to work as a partner to help you migrate, from my understanding. And we're not trying to say you can keep doing the same things and just keep paying us more, because there's a limitation to the amount of work that can be done if it's even technically feasible to fix everything like you'd normally expect in an LTS. Again, this kernel version that's being shipped is 11 years old. And just to give a context, the current 2-point releases on the Linux kernel, like 6.7 something and 6.7 the next, is 17,000 commits and 14,000 commits, and they're about 2 months apart from each other.
That's so
wild. Imagine that over 11 years.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
Yeah, not bored, Mr. Maple. Not bored.
Oh no. well, there's lots of stuff to do, but yeah. So that's where I see our value is different than the other companies. Is we have, well, excuse me, I don't know all companies, so I imagine that Red Hat and SUSE and Debian are all doing something, and I don't know what it is exactly. I haven't done that technology survey, but we are admitting that we can't. Providing the same level of LTS support that Red Hat provided is not feasible at our company size. However, we are going to do our best to make sure that you have an established way of keeping your production servers as secure as we can provide, whilst migrating to one of our more current, more secure, and more up-to-date offerings.
Versions of Rocky. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love those words, more secure. That sounds motivating, right? As one of the reasons to do this kind of migration.
Yeah. So not to put the cart before the horse, but we have some stuff being published soon in that area. And I'm not going to get into the details until it is actually published. But the thing that I would say it's more secure than CentOS 7 is that the CentOS 7 code is static. And nefarious ne'er-do-wells can take that code and analyze it. And nobody's really watching the CentOS 7 stack for these sorts of things independently. Everybody's working on the upstream. And again, that code delta is, you got the upstream way up here and CentOS 7 way back here. Some of the things that they have already fixed in one of the many intervening pieces in between might still be vulnerable that we just don't know it is, because nobody's looking at it, because it had been fixed by something that wasn't actually listed as a bug fix or a CVE.
Sure. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I wanted to get into, because I think you have a really interesting past and how you got here. I know you've done a lot of backporting and a lot of keeping things alive for people. Pick a story. I don't care which one. I think you have tons of them. So examples of why this is hard and why this is not a great idea and why you should just upgrade and stay current.
Yeah, sure. I can speak from it from like a so some of the designs of the kernel source tree that we are using inside CIQ is based off of several experiences I had at Cray and to a lesser degree at Amazon, because I was not on the kernel team there. But one of the issues I found while working at Cray was we worked with SUSE most of the time, and we had special partnerships with them, and we were allowed to get easier access to their source control and see what was going on, so that we could, be real early in the beta stages of their releases. We did this weird thing at Cray where our mainline development, where all of our code went into, like, you would go, oh, this is mainline, I'm going to commit all my changes here, and that's what will get released. That's also where we had all of our updates. So like if you wanted to update from SUSE 11 Service Pack 1 to Service Pack 2, I had to take a diff of all of Linux from what SUSE delivered in Service Pack 2 to Service Pack 1, create that diff and make it as a single commit at the head of the mainline kernel, which never works. So you had a bunch of merge conflicts. So I had to go, all right, well, this code has changed. How has it changed? And I need to go figure out what SUSE did, and then go figure out what the upstream did, and go, all right, well, that option isn't being used, so this patch doesn't work correctly. And then I'd sort out those to get it to be able to be committed. And then I had to get it to build. So I had a bunch of build time conflicts. And then I had a bunch of merge or runtime conflicts I had to sort through. What I found with that, especially with like the vendor kernels and as they aged out, is there's a lot of changes that existed in the source code that were like, oh, this version we'll use the classic kernel 2632, which was a very common kernel number for those that are in the industry. At one point during SUSE, I think it was 10 or 11, they're like, we can't keep backporting everything and keeping the KABI or the kernel application binary interface, the thing that like drivers talk to that aren't shipped from the kernel that make it keep working. It's one of the big value adds of vendor kernels. They're like, all right, we can't keep doing this. We're going to migrate to Linux 3.0 from 2632. And they're like, cool, we're going to do this, and we're going to try to be more in line with upstream. And I'm like, cool, this all worked. I was then asked to support a bunch of CentOS 6 or CentOS 5 kernels because our clusters used CentOS, our supercomputers used SUSE, and our AI stuff used Ubuntu. And they're like, my management is like, we want to take all this cool work we did on the supercomputers and give it to the clusters and give it to the AI stuff. And I'm like, cool. I start pulling them out and I try to integrate them. And then you have to go, all right, well, Red Hat / CentOS at the time didn't backport all of this, but why? And they're like sorting through the code, and you have like 10 browsers open, multiple versions of the code open in different terminals, and you're trying to sort out like how and why decisions were made. Some of it's they don't support this option. Some of it is, oh, to maintain that interface, they had to change the code so it doesn't look like what it did and where it came from in the upstream. And it came really, really difficult. That is one of those weird stories where you're like, okay, I can see what is going on underneath the covers, and I don't like it, but I get why it's happening. It just became difficult to maintain multiple versions of OSs, even though they said they were the same kernel version. The 2632 CentOS kernel looked a lot more like my SUSE kernel than it did an actual 2632 kernel, because they would just pull back whole swaths of things so that they maintain closer to upstream, but were basically lying about the version number so that the third-party drivers would work. So that's the difficult part there.
You have mentioned backporting several times. I just want to make sure that everybody understands exactly when you say backporting. Can you tell us exactly what that means? Because I think a lot of people hear it and they're like, okay, that's not hard, but it's hard.
Yeah. So it's a lot of the times there's kind of two things that will happen. Either it will come in absolutely cleanly, like you go, I want to apply my patch, for lack of a better term, versus what we actually do in the kernel. I want to apply my patch and it just cleanly goes in. There's no offset. There's no fuzz. Fuzz is when you have a bunch of changes and there's stuff outside the context that is like, oh, this line is different, but I'll allow one line to be different from my patch file. You gotta go in and go, is that fuzz something I can deal with? Like, what if that in that fuzz, it's setting a variable that's in your patch to a null pointer, and then you try to use it in the patch. Well, that fuzz is bad because now you've introduced a kernel panic, for example, by dereferencing a null variable, which basically means here's my piece of memory. The actual data is way over here somewhere, and you expect it to be used in your patch. However, in that fuzz, in that area around it, it says this is null. And if you say, I want to access null to get a value out, it should panic. It should be like, seg fault, I can't do that. You're accessing an invalid memory space. So it's not just bringing the patch in. It's also knowing the context around it. And then it gets into even more complex when you get to an area like that's real old, has been modified several times, and it's different than the upstream, but it's still technically vulnerable. But it's now you have to figure out, like, this patch does actions A, B, C, and D. We're like B is the vulnerable part that gets fixed, but we don't have parts A and C, but we have B and D. And now how do we like integrate those together and make sure that we're not inducing other bugs? And that's the big thing, is how do you make sure that everything you fix doesn't induce other problems, provided you know where the fix is, which is subject number 2. In the Linux kernel and most CVEs that people see, you can tell exactly which piece of code fixes that CVE. They've been very upfront about that. In other user space applications, there might be nothing. They're just like, it is fixed in this version. It was introduced in this version. There are 50,000 commits. Good luck, unless you are actively a part of that community. And my big example of this is patching WebKit GTK, which, if you didn't know, that's basically Apple's WebKit, so rendering all the stuff, but built for GNOME. There's several layers of obfuscation there, and it just says they don't maintain any stable branches. They have the one they're working on and the previous one, and they just flip-flop back and forth through the whole thing. So if you need to fix something and you're like 15 versions behind and nobody tells you where that piece of code is, you have to try to find it. So then you have to become an expert in that piece of software to know where use after free or null pointer exception or address overrun sort of thing is, when that's basically what the code, the CVE says, is like, oh, this sort of thing happens. So you're like, good, great. I get to go comb through 50,000 commits to maybe find the one. So then you get going, all right, well, let's take GTK for example here, because I experienced this at AWS, is what if we just rev it to the next version? Because we can't find all the CVE patches, and not even Red Hat has published where all the like they fixed it, but they didn't say which commit it was. So we're like, all right, cool. So we're like, what if we rev it to the most recent version? That took one of my system engineers 3 months to get working. Because it changed dependencies and build structures in it so much that it took that long to fix. Because we couldn't find all the patches. So then we believed that revving would be good. He did all that work. I did the next set of CVEs on that. I got most of them, and it should have worked. And then we were having some other issues, and a new one came in. We couldn't find it, so we tried to go, oh, we just recently rebuilt this. Let's just rev it to the next version. There were 4 code refactors in it.
Wow.
So that's what it was. There were 4 code refactors. The CVE was past all of those code refactors, and we couldn't guarantee that we knew enough about the exploit to know to bring it back. So we're like, we'll just rev it. Didn't rev. It took that senior engineer again, senior systems engineer, like another couple weeks to rebuild it, because it's that complex of a package.
That's brutal, and that's exactly what I was looking for, so that everybody understands that this is hard. This is not an easy thing to go do. And the further back in time you're trying to go, the harder it gets, the more messy it gets. So move to a modern version of Rocky, please, quickly. And then I know you and I talked about philosophies on patching. I think I know where this is going to go, but what do you believe when it comes to patching? How should people address that, and kind of how current should they stay?
So when you refer to patching, are you referring to like frequency of updating
Sure.
their fleets, or
Yeah.
updating the base layers, or the minor versions, or the major versions? Sorry, it's
Both.
a little of an
Both. I
overloaded
think
term.
it's a little bit of both. So I think people staying current on major version is something that really gets ignored and forgotten the longest. I still run across a lot of people on the minor versions that take years past when they should have done it. But I know what I believe in. I'm just curious how you feel about it.
I have a confession. I run Arch Linux on my home machines. So I'm always at the bleeding edge, and about every third week I'm fixing my grub installation. So that's not, I don't recommend people doing that. But most of the time I don't have a whole lot of issues upgrading on a daily basis, but that's not really sustainable for production software. So how do we find that happy medium? In my opinion, you should probably try to target the 0.2 release of most 10-year cycle OSs. That gives you that lets some of the stuff get weeded out in the .0 and the .1 release, and you should start targeting that, because after you get past about 0.4, 0.6, it starts slowing down in terms of the bug fixes, the feature updates, all that sort of stuff. So that gives you a couple of years. I'm going to go back to my old company. I liked the way that the Amazon Linux was starting to approach it. Is they were going, you get 2 years of active support, and then you get 3 years of LTS on Amazon Linux. And basically, they'd release a new version every 2 years. So you had 2 years of support, then there would be a new version available. So you had a much smaller, much more minor jump. But if you didn't want to take that one, the LTS supported you to have 1 year rollover of that LTS versus the next one. So you'd have 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. That's 6 years out. Or you'd be 4 years out, and you'd still have 1 year of rollover if you really needed it. I like that faster iteration model. And one of the things that I liked was they agreed, kind of like with Upstream, is that they were not using for their Amazon Linux 2, their target is, I think, 6.2 right now, is as their version of the Linux kernel. So they have progressed the Linux kernel more in line with mainline than they have with the actual CentOS 7 kernel that Amazon Linux 2 is based off of. So rather than having it like an army of hundreds of engineers doing the backporting of all the time, they kept most everybody updated by just building whatever that new kernel was for all the different versions that they had released. So that's where I'm at. I'd like to see the overall reduction in long-term support timelines, but I know that's not really, that may be a future discussion for future generations of CTOs and stuff, because we have a current model right now, and we need to ease our way into that, get people accustomed to upgrading.
Very nice.
There are probably some things that can help with that as well, that maybe we didn't even have 10 years ago that we do now. That might be a different, just conversation, but that's definitely something to look into for people. Is help with that. We do have a question from Art.
Such a hot topic.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
for bringing this up,
know.
Art.
I
I know he's just trying to strike a match and throw it in the middle and walk off. I know what he's doing. Thanks, Art. I think I've given
What do
my
you think
opinion on
about
this, but
live
I'm
kernel patching? Ay.
really interested in your take on this, Mabel.
It is something that we don't have the staff to support right now. So basically, you need to do your backporting, and then you need to do additional backporting of those specific fixes. Because basically, what it's doing is saying, "Hey, my kernel is," I'm trying to make a block here. My kernel is in memory. Oh, there's a fix that replaces like this block of code. So it goes, oh, instead, you're over here now, and you're running in this memory. These are designed to be able to fast patch fixes and reboot at a predetermined time that is safe for you to take down your service. Compounding K-splice on top of K-splice on top of K-splice is generally a bad idea.
Wait,
Just
so I
like
thought that live kernel patching, you didn't have to reboot. I thought that was the whole point
you,
of it. Is
So
that
no, it's so that you don't have to immediately reboot.
okay? So there is still a reboot necessary. You just get to plan it. You get to have the patch, and hopefully it works, and
Mhm.
then you do a reboot at whatever time you need to.
Yeah, there will be some that argue that you don't ever have to reboot your kernel, but that is taking a lot of um trust that the memory
way too
space
much.
will remain stable. Um, I the same thing happens in user space. So one of my principal engineers at AWS, he's very knowledgeable at glibc, basically the library that literally everything runs on top of, like PHP, which is the current hot topic in this issue. What happens when you upgrade your system? You say, I need a glibc update come in. So basically the base C library that talks to the kernel and talks to the hardware, if that needs updated, you've updated the RPM, and thus every new instantiation and symlink to that glibc is to the new version that you've just done your RPM upgrade to, or your DNF update to. That doesn't apply to any application that is actively running. So if everything's built against glibc and you have a bunch of applications running that are running against a vulnerable version, and you update your glibc, there's still a subset of processes on your system using a vulnerable set of SO or dynamically linked objects that are active because they are actively using it right now. They don't just dynamically unload it. So rebooting is good.
It's always been my fear. I've heard great things and horror stories about doing live kernel patching, where you reboot and all of a sudden that stuff was not really committed to disk. It was all in memory, so you may not have the patch you think or thought you had.
Yeah, and
That,
I don't know enough about that area. Like, it didn't really exist while I was in my previous kernel roles. I've just been told how it works and how you can liken it to like the glibc updates, where it's a little bit easier to understand. But usually with a ksplice update, there comes like just a normal kernel update, from my understanding, so that when you load it up, you get everything.
absolutely.
But the
I
other
like Neil's-
problem is not all updates come in ksplices. Sometimes you just need to update.
Sure. I like Neil's comment. Servers are cheap, buy lots of them, and don't K-patch. It's fantastic.
There you go.
Fantastic.
Oh man. All right. So it sounds like there are pros and cons to just about everything. And it really depends on your sensitivity to risk, I suppose, and what it is that you want to be doing. So, yeah, today, obviously, our topic was CIQ Bridge, which is basically CIQ providing support and security updates for CentOS while you are migrating. That is the idea, right? To give you a little bit more time to kind of bridge the ease of that pain. And of course, we'll help you do that. Was there anything else about CIQ Bridge that you wanted them to know, Maple?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know all the details of what we tell our customers on that. I help support it.
And we appreciate that. Thank you very much for that, and for kind of giving a little bit of a deep dive and explanation on the work that goes into it, and the challenge and the value that this offer brings to our customers, and how necessary it is. I wish we had a little chart too. We should have thought of that, but maybe we'll pop it in there at some point, just like of all the machines that are still running CentOS right now.
It's terrifying. And I think there's a lot of them we don't even know about. Yeah, terrifying.
There's a lot of you out there. So, hey, pre-warning, the plumbing has an end of life. Okay.
There's a big leak
There's
you don't know about yet. Actually, you do know about it. You've been told you have a leak. You just can't see it yet.
And you will see it June of this year. So that's only a couple months away. So reach out to CIQ, come to our website, ciq.com. You can fill out any form in there. It's going to come to us. We will happily chat with you about your environment, what's going on, best practices. And if CIQ Bridge is the right move for you, then we are here to support that for you. And oh, this has been awesome. Mr. Maple, I haven't actually had conversations with you. We've just kind of like, typed a little bit in the internal Slack and stuff. So it's really nice getting to know you and hear you and all of your stories. So thanks for being with us.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I could talk a little bit about the difficulties of what this is and hopefully how we can help not keep a sustained potential problem for the customer's business, but help engage them going, we'll help you get to the next stage. And here's what we can here's what we are trying to offer to help you get there.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maple.
Mm-hmm. All right. Appreciate it, everyone. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Thanks for subscribing. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.